I will say this plainly. I did not ride out to the South Bend fence that morning hoping to find Emmett Hale already there. I rode out because the posts were rotted half to nothing, and Duchess had made a hobby of finding the weak spots, and if I had to chase that red cow across the property line one more time, I was going to sell her to a butcher in Helena and sleep soundly about it. The October air had a clean bite to it, the kind that wakes you up faster than coffee and makes your hands ache if you forget your gloves. I had not forgotten my gloves. I had also brought wire, nails, a post driver, and 2 seasoned cedar posts tied across the back of my saddle, because when Clara Dawson rides out to fix a fence, the fence gets fixed. What I had not brought was Patience for company. He was already working when I came around the bend, crouched on his side of the line with a hammer in one hand and a look of deep personal betrayal on his face, as though the fence post had insulted his mother. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow and there was dirt on his jaw, and his new gloves, I noticed, were not so new anymore. They had earned some honest wear in the weeks since his arrival. I reined up and considered my options. I could turn around and come back later. I could ride straight to my section, 30 yards south, and pretend he did not exist. Or I could do what any reasonable neighbor would do, even a neighbor she was not supposed to speak to, and acknowledge the man repairing the other half of a shared fence. "You are holding that hammer like it owes you money," I said. He looked up. There was a smear of something dark across his forehead, probably mud, possibly blood from a scraped knuckle. He studied me for a moment, then looked down at his hand like the hammer had just appeared there by accident. "I am holding it the way a person holds a hammer," he said. "You are holding it halfway up the handle. Choke down to the base. You'll hit harder with less effort." He adjusted his grip without argument, swung once, and drove the nail clean. He looked at the nail, then at me, then back at the nail as if the nail might explain what had just happened. "That was significantly better," he said. "You're welcome," I said, and rode on to my section. For a while, we worked in what I will generously call companionable silence. I dug out the worst of the rotted posts and drove my new ones in, tamped the dirt hard around the bases, and strung fresh wire with the pliers my father had given me when I was 14. The work was familiar and honest, the kind that empties your mind and fills your hands, and I fell into the rhythm of it the way I always did. Emmett, 30 yards up the line, was having a less rhythmic experience. I could hear the irregular clang of his hammer, the occasional muttered word I chose not to identify, and once a sound that I believe was a fence post falling over and striking him somewhere unfortunate. I did not look. I am not heartless, but I am not a saint either, and there is a particular satisfaction in knowing you can do something well while someone nearby is learning the hard way that competence is not inherited. After perhaps an hour, I ran out of wire on my spool. I had cut it close, brought exactly what I estimated I would need, and I had estimated wrong by about 4 feet. I could ride back to the barn for another spool, which would cost me an hour round trip, or I could ask the man 30 yards away if he had any to spare. I weighed my pride against my time and found that my time was worth more. "Hale," I called out, keeping my voice level as though I were asking a fence post for directions. "Do you have wire to spare?" He straightened up and pushed his hair out of his face. It needed cutting, still, though it had grown past awkward and into something almost deliberate. He said, "I have wire. I do not have confidence that I know what to do with all of it. Bring me 4 feet and I will demonstrate." He walked over carrying the spool, and that was the moment the silence broke. Not with anything dramatic, but with the simple mechanics of 2 people working on the same stretch of fence from opposite sides. He held the wire taut while I twisted the splice. I showed him how to wrap the join so it would not snag on hide. He asked sensible questions, which surprised me, and listened to the answers, which surprised me more. "You learned all of this from your father?" he asked, bracing a post while I nailed the crosswire. "From my father, from Jed Farley when he still worked both places, and from the fence itself. A fence will teach you what it needs if you pay attention." "The fence has been a poor conversationalist on my end," he said, and I almost smiled before I caught myself. We kept working. The sun climbed higher and the chill burned off, and somewhere between the third splice and the fifth, the conversation drifted from practical to personal, the way water finds the lowest ground without anyone deciding it should. "Your father mentioned you were back east," I said, careful as a person testing ice on a pond. "Schooling?" "University," he said. "4 years in a city that smelled like coal smoke and ambition." "Law?" I asked, because that was what men went east for, in my experience, which was admittedly limited. He was quiet for a moment, holding a nail in place with more precision than I had seen him for before. "Literature," he said. "I studied literature." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. Really looked, because I had assumed a great many things about Emmett Hale in the weeks since his arrival, and nearly all of them had involved the word soft and useless, and probably studied something practical like the law. Literature was not on the list. "Literature," I repeated. "Poetry, mostly. Some novels, a good deal of Shakespeare, though I am not sure Shakespeare benefits from being studied rather than simply read." He said this without apology or embarrassment, just a plain fact about himself delivered in the same tone he might use to say he preferred coffee to tea. "You came back to Elkridge, Montana to run a cattle ranch with a head full of Shakespeare?" "I came back because my father is ill, and this land is the only thing he ever cared about enough to keep," Emmett said. He twisted the wire once, clean and tight the way I had shown him. "The Shakespeare I brought along for the company." I did not know what to say to that. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in a long while, and it landed in a place I was not prepared to examine, so I did what I do best and changed the subject. "Duchess broke through this exact spot 3 weeks ago," I said, nodding at the section we had just repaired. "She has a gift for finding the weakest post in any fence line." "Duchess," he said, "the red cow with the editorial opinions." I laughed before I could stop it. It came out sharp and surprised, like a bird startled from a bush, and I turned it into a cough, but he had heard it, and I could see the corner of his mouth do something it had not done in my presence before. "She does have opinions," I admitted, "mostly about whose grass is better." "In her defense," he said, "the grass on my side has been neglected for quite some time. It is practically an invitation." "I will let her know you said so," I said. "She will be on your porch by morning." "I would welcome the company," he said, and there was something underneath the joke that was not a joke at all, something quiet and lonely that I recognized because I had felt it myself on nights when the house was too big and the silence was too deep. We finished the stretch by early afternoon. The fence line ran clean and tight between our properties, the new posts pale against the weathered ones, the wire catching the thin October light. It was good work. I knew it because I knew fences, and I could see that he knew it too. Not because he knew fences yet, but because he could feel the difference between something done well and something done poorly, and he had enough honesty to tell which side of that line his own work fell on. "Thank you for the wire," I said, coiling what was left on my spool. "Thank you for the education," he said. He paused, and I watched him decide whether to say the next thing. "Same stretch will need checking after the first hard freeze. Posts shift when the ground moves." I looked at him. "That is correct," I said. "How did you know that?" "I read it in a book," he said, and the way he said it, perfectly dry and perfectly aware of how ridiculous it sounded, made me want to laugh again. I did not this time, but I wanted to. I gathered my tools and mounted up, and he stepped back to his side of the line with his hands in his ruined gloves and that quiet, careful expression he wore like other men wore hats. I turned my horse toward home and then stopped because something occurred to me that I had not planned to say. "Hale," I called back. He looked up. "The hammer grip," I said. "You remembered." I am a fast learner, when the teacher's sufficiently terrifying. I rode home with the sun warm on my back and a feeling in my chest that I refused to name. something between amusement and curiosity and the unsettling awareness that I had just spent 3 hours with a man I was not supposed to speak to and enjoyed every minute of it. The fence held. I checked it that evening and again the next morning, running my hand along the wire, testing the posts, and everything was solid and true. 2 people had built it from opposite sides, working toward the middle, and it was stronger than anything either of us could have done alone. I told myself that was just a fact about fences. I told myself it did not mean anything else. I told myself a great many things that evening, sitting on the porch with the last of the daylight fading behind the mountains, and most of them were even true. But the one thing I could not quite sell to myself, the thing that sat in the corner of my mind like a cat that refused to be moved, was this. He had called Duchess editorial, and he had been right. And I had laughed. That, I decided, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to me all autumn.